Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. I make tons of videos about living with chronic illness, cozy things, and mostly books, definitely about books. Today's video, we're going to do the mid-year book freakout tag where we go through kind of all the books I've read this year and talk about favorites, disappointments, upcoming books I'd like to read, things like that. It's a tag that goes around every year around this time, and it's a really fun tag to do. Just gets me thinking about what I've read so far and kind of reflecting on the year so far, so I really like to do it. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get into the video. So the first question is, how has your 2023 reading year gone so far? And I would say very good. I have really focused on just reading books that I truly think I'm going to love. I think last year, while I did like a lot of books, I was figuring out a lot of what I wanted to read and what I liked in books. And this year I've really just kind of honed in on the things I do like. And I found some genres that I didn't really realize were a thing. So like historical fantasy, I like historical, but putting those together seems to be like one of my perfect genres, or cozy fantasy as well, things like that I found more of. So I feel like this year has gone really, really well. I also stopped reading books this year, and I think that's really helped me because I often feel like what I was giving number wise doesn't really reflect how I'm feeling. So I like that I now just get to talk about the books and how I felt about it rather than worrying about a number. So I think that's been super helpful and has really aided in having a good reading year. So the next question is, what is the best book you've read in 2023? And that is hands down Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a book that completely has touched my heart and it's just become my whole personality. Like, this is on my favorite books of all time list right now. It has just blown me away and makes me think about it all the time. So Dora is coded as neurodivergent, and Olivia Atwater herself is also neurodivergent. So if you're looking for a book that features a neurodivergent main character that is also by a neurodivergent author, I would highly recommend this. It was so beautiful. I think if you like cozy fantasy, if you like romance or romantasy, and if you like historical, I think all of those would make this a really good book for you. So I know that a lot of people have already read this, and so I'm a little late to the hype, but man, is it worth it. So the next question is, best sequel you've read in 2023? And I think that there's been a lot, but I have to say hands down, really the entire series, but specifically the third book is the Diviner series. So this is the third book, Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray, and the entire series is just one that I read this entire year, and I have grown to really, really love it. It is just such a well woven story, and one that you can really read from multiple characters' perspectives. I think there's like 8 different characters and you get their perspectives, and each character feels so real and so fleshed out. And I would highly recommend the audiobook as well if you're looking for that. It just really makes the story come alive. And while it's a very, very dark story, it is much more like YA horror. It is just so interesting to read about like the themes that Libba Bray is touching on here, specifically with America and the secrets America tries to hold of its past, and how those things will just eventually come to light. And it's so well done. It made me cry. It made me feel all of the emotions. I absolutely fell in love with the characters, and I love the plot itself. But the third book was by far my favorite. Well, I say by far. The third book was my favorite. They all are very close range. I would say if I had to rank it, it would probably go 3, 1, 2, 4. The next question is a new release you haven't read but want to. And I actually couldn't pick, so I have 2 for this one. First one being A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This came out early in the year, I want to say January, and I still haven't read it. I found T. Kingfisher last year and quickly became one of my favorite authors. I really have enjoyed her horror. I've only read one though. This is another one that I think I want to get to, but I've really loved her fantasy specifically. I've read about 4 of them, I think, so far, and all I've really enjoyed. So I just can't wait to dive into this one and really love her horror as well, because I think the quirky way she writes her characters and just the like almost whimsicalness of every story, it just is really well done. There's something about the way she writes her horror that just has a suspension but also feels very accessible to me, and I tend to like a cozier story, so I think that's why it works for me. And I think some people who read horror probably brand these as more cozy horror because they aren't as scary, but I still really like them. So I'm really excited to get to this one. I just really need to, because T. Kingfisher's one of my favorite authors, and I should really read this, and it's not that long, so I can do it. So the next one's one that recently released, and I just haven't got to it yet, is Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Boulley. This is it's kind of a sequel to Firekeeper's Daughter, but it's more like a companion book. This is following one of the twins that was in the first book They are part of an indigenous community there, and there's lots of things that the first book unpacked with just life there, and it was a mystery. It was so good. It was a YA like mystery book, and I just think Angeline Boulley does such a good job of like weaving together all these different themes into a mystery. It's a very slow burn mystery, Firekeeper's Daughter was, but it was just so well done, and I feel like we unpacked so much about this community, and so I'm very, very excited to get to this one. I think it's going to be just as good. Yeah, I just can't wait. So the next question is most anticipated releases for the second half of the year, and I have 3 of them. So the first one is the 7th book in the Rexford and Sloane series. This is the first one. The 7th one is called Murder at the Merton Library, and I think it releases September 26th. And that is just one that I love this series so much. It's following Rexford and Sloane, and they're a sleuthing duo, and Rexford is a earl or a lord, and he is like very into science, and then Sloane is an artist who is writing for these papers, so she writes about the Ton and kind of like spills its secrets and stuff, and so they work together to solve the mysteries that are going on, and each mystery has a science-based aspect to it. So I'm really excited for this one because not only is it going to be science-based, which I've loved all of them so far, it's at a library, so I'm wondering if it has to do with like manuscripts or something. I really don't look into them a lot before going in because I just like being surprised by the mystery because they're such a good series that I think it's the best way for me to read them. So the next one I'm excited for is Thornhenge by T. Kingfisher, and this releases August 15th, but all I know is that it's a tale of a kind-hearted toad-shaped heroine, a gentle knight, and a mission gone completely sideways. Really, I'm just picking up anything T. Kingfisher writes at this point, and this one is fantasy. It says fantasy horror, but I don't know. I'm just excited for it. I think it's going to be cozy because all hers are, and it kind of reminds me of like Swan Princess for some reason, or what's Sleeping Beauty, one of those, Pibby. And then the last one I'm excited for is The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This one is a horror book and it has to do with vampires, and I think it's kind of the Wild West. I don't know. I've really been focusing on trying to pick up sequels or the next books by authors I really love, and so I read The Hacienda last year by Isabel Cañas and I loved it. It was so good. It was like one of my favorite horror books of the year, so I am just excited to pick up her next book because I just really like when I enjoy an author, I like reading all of their books, and so this is her next release, and that comes out August 29th as well. So August and September are going to be the time for releases. Next question is biggest disappointment of the year so far, and for that one I have A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. Now this one isn't like horrible. I didn't like give it a 1 star or 2 star, anything like that. It's just that I hyped this book up so much in my head for me. Like I thought it was going to be a new favorite book, and it really just like disappointed me because I think I just had such high hopes. This is about a sleuthing duo as well. It's historical in 1887. I think if you're a romance reader, this might entice you more, but as someone who really predominantly likes the mystery but also enjoys a couple, it just didn't work for me quite as much. I think I wanted more mystery and less of the romance. There's a lot of like back and forth bickering between them, and I think I found in my historical mystery romances that I enjoy a couple that can work together and aren't like the bickering type, and so I just think this didn't work as much for me, but I can see why people do really like it. It's just that I think romance is so subjective. I mean, every genre is so subjective, but it's just one of those things where you have to really like the couple to enjoy the series, and I think for me it just wasn't exactly what I was looking for in terms of the romance. So I think I like a softer romance, and I didn't realize that. I think I will try to give next book in the series a try, and I have the next, I think 2 in the series, so I might as well try them and see how it goes, but I don't know if this series will be for me, which is disappointing. So the next question is the biggest surprise of the year so far, and that has to be The Bandit Queens by Purani Shroff. This was one I read this month, and I just kind of picked it up because I had heard like 1 or 2 reviews of it, and people said like if you like Finlay Donovan, maybe try this. It is very different than Finlay Donovan, but I can see the comparison, and I really just went into this not knowing a ton, and I completely fell in love with it. I ended up getting my own copy. I didn't even have my own copy, I just read it from the library, and that's how much I loved it. I had to run out and get it. So this is following Geeta, and years before she had lost her husband, she believes he just left and walked out on her, but everyone in the village believes that she killed him, and so she's kind of been ostracized from the society because she is looked at like she is a murderer. Then one day, one of the other women approaches her and they want her to kill their husband. And so it sweeps her up into this big mystery that is kind of Finley Donovan-esque, where it's like a main character gets wrapped up in something that they never intended to, and it just gets out of hand and crazy. And the thing I loved about this book was there's a lot of dark things talked about in here. There's talk about domestic abuse and violence against women, which is not my thing that I like to read about. I just tend to not want to read that. I actually had to DNF books this year because of that. And so I was a little weary when I realized that this was what it was about. But there's such a way that while there's bad things happening to the women, there's so much to laugh at and have fun with, and the way the women interact with each other is so fun that it like counterbalances it a little bit, and it's just dealt with in a way that's very entertaining but hard-hitting at the same time. I don't know how to describe it except for that it's almost like if literary fiction met up with like a funny mystery. So I really, really loved it. I think there was just so much to have fun with in here and so much to learn about and care about in here. And the characters, I just love them. I love the women in this. I will read whatever Prani Shroff comes out with. I don't know if she has any more out or if this was her debut. Oh, it is her debut. Yeah, it was amazing. For a debut novel, this was so good. It was absolutely a new favorite book and I would highly recommend it. So that was my biggest surprise of the year. So the next question is a new favorite author, and that can be new to me or a debut author. And so for that, I'm picking C.L. Polk. This one is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. I've read this one, Witchmark, and Even Though I Knew the End. So Even Though I Knew the End and Midnight Bargain are really good. Like I gave them both 5 stars. And then Witchmark, I didn't give a full 5 stars, but I did really enjoy it as well. I would just say it's their debut, so it's not as fleshed out as the rest of them. But I read this one first and just absolutely fell in love with the writing style. C.L. Polk has just this way of world building that is very light and actual world building, but I feel like I'm there. They're historical. This one's a historical fantasy romance. Actually, I think all of them kind of have romance and historical now that I think about it. And I thought it was so well done. I absolutely loved it. And then I read Even Though I Knew the End, and I love that as well. It's like a mystery historical, it's got romance, and it's just quick, really good fantasy mystery with some sprinkle of romance. And if you like a sapphic romance, that one is sapphic as well. So yeah, C.L. Polk is definitely a new favorite author. I will try anything they write. I am going to read through the rest of the Witchmark series. I think it's called the King Cycles? The Kingmaker Cycles? I'll put it up here. I will definitely read through that, and then anything they release I will be picking up. So the next question is a book that made me cry, and I think it's going to be kind of funny which one it is. A lot of books make me cry, but this one is the one that really stuck with me for this question, and that's Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. This is like a cozy, fun mystery about this woman who is kind of going through life. She recently lost her husband. Her son doesn't really visit her all that often, and she's just kind of bored with her life, and there's not really a lot of customers that come with this tea shop that she runs. But one day she comes down and she finds a dead body, and she decides she's gonna figure out who did it. So it makes her meet up and get to know all these people that were in his life before he died, and it's got some found family elements to it, which is one of the reasons why I loved it so much. But it also is very funny and just quirky and a good time. It's more of a cozy mystery than like a ridiculous over the top like Finley Donovan or something like that. I just thought it was so good. It was so readable. I flew through it, but about the end, like little bit, just made me cry. There's a scene with Vera that just broke my heart, and I just was bawling my eyes out because the way Jessie Q. Sutanto writes these characters, it just made me fall in love with them, especially Vera, because we're like mainly getting her perspective. We get other people's perspective along the way, but Vera starts out as a very like strong-headed character that gets kind of like into people's business. She gives unsolicited advice. It's so beautiful how like you come from like this big personality at the beginning to like really loving her by the end. And yeah, I thought Vera was just like a very well-rounded character in the end, and I just loved getting to know her. And so that part just really made me bawl my eyes out. So yeah, if you're looking for a cozy mystery, I don't think it'll make everyone cry, but it definitely made me cry. I checked this one out. So the next question is a book you saw on Book Talk and regret reading. And for this, I'm going to mend it to BookTube because I don't really get a lot of book recommendations from Book Talk at the moment. And this is one that I ended up DNFing, and so I think it's a good one for this one. And that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This I saw on BookTube a couple times for horror and like kind of a fantasy horror. And a lot of people were saying like this isn't horror, it's fantasy. So I thought, you know, it's gonna be a good one to dip my toes into. It's about witches and kind of puritanical society. I DNF'd, as you can see, like right there, about 65% of the way through. I just couldn't read it anymore. I actually stopped at this one specific scene that is having to do with birth. And there's just a lot to trauma for women in here. And it's very dark. Like, I knew it was a horror, but everyone kind of said, like, this isn't horror, this is fantasy. And I just should have looked up trigger warnings. The book itself, so well written. The atmosphere that Alexis Henderson builds is so good. Like, the writing and the atmosphere, 100%, I think is so good. And I think if these things weren't triggering for me, I wouldn't have put them down. But I do regret reading this because it just made me feel so gross. I was in such a bad mood for the whole week I was reading it, and finally I realized, like, I need to put this down because it's just so dark. There's just so much trauma against women in here that I just couldn't do it anymore. And that scene with the birthing scene was a lot. And so I couldn't even finish it. So I would say I regret reading this one. This was also a 5-star prediction, and I just really should have looked more into my horror. I think that's something for the future, is like looking more into trigger warnings for horror, because it was not for me, and I wish I had known that. So next question is, what's the most beautiful book you bought this year? And I think I have to go with Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. For one, I was thinking about this cover-wise, stunning. Like, isn't that beautiful? But for two, the inside of the book is just as beautiful as the outside, in my opinion. It is a bit of a romance, a bit of a adventure story. I would say if you like romance, historical, and fantasy, I think this one is also a good one. It's not quite as cozy as like Half a Soul is to me, but it still has that charm. There is just like some on page like death. So if you're like really looking for a cozy fantasy that has none of that, I wouldn't say this for you. But if you just like a general cozy fantasy can handle some of that, I would also recommend this. It was so sweet. I knew from like the first like I think 20 pages that this was going to be a 5-star new favorite book, and I wasn't wrong. It was so good, and I would definitely be picking up the rest of the series. I've really found out that I like historical fantasy romance, especially when they have like more of a plot underneath. So this one just blew me away. It's a beautiful book inside and out. And the last question is, what are books you still have to read this year? And I just picked 3 because there's a lot, but 2 of them are by the same author. So that is Mexican Gothic and The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So Mexican Gothic, I've heard, for fans of the Hacienda, should read Mexican Gothic, and for fans of What Moves the Dead. And I loved both of those, so I really feel like I'm going to like this. I really haven't tried to look into this at all because I don't want to be spoiled for anything. I keep putting it off, and so I know I'm going to get spoiled at some point, and I know so many people love this book. So I just need to read it. I just haven't been in the horror mood, and I think that'll come with fall. So I'm going to wait and probably read it in the fall, unless I decide to get to it sooner, but I think fall is going to be the good time for that. And it's not long, it's like 300 pages. So like I know I could read this year, but I just think I'm a little intimidated because I'm worried that it won't be a 5-star, but I really want it to be so much. Like, I think I'm going to love this. So yeah, Mexican Gothic. And then The Beautiful Ones is a like fantasy romance. So I just saw this one, and based on what people have been saying about it, I just feel like I will like it because it does remind me a bit of like Half a Soul and a bit of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I don't know if it'll be as cozy, but I just think like this seems like a book I'm gonna like because I've been really getting into like that kind of historical fantasy romance type thing. And I don't think it's gonna be super steamy, which is not what I like either. Yeah, so all I know is that she starts to like get involved with this guy, and I think he's in love with her sister, so I think there's gonna be some drama there. And there's something about magic, and she's trying to learn magic from him. I think that's all I really know about this, but it's one of those books where I look at and I go, I think you're gonna be for me, you know? And you can't really tell why, but just based on like the little things I've heard from people, I'm just like, yeah, this is a Brie book. So that's one I really want to get to. And then finally I have The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. I've read all of Simone St. James's newer work except for this one, and then I've read one of her backlist, and I have 2 more to read of her backlist, but those are historical like thriller mysteries, and this one is historical, but it's like 1950s. The other ones are like 1800s or early 1900s. I love Simone St. James's writing. I really enjoyed The Book of Cold Cases and The Sundown Motel. The Sundown Motel is probably my favorite so far. They're just very like gothic. They're very suspenseful and creepy, and I like that they usually have some paranormal element to it. I really like her writing, so I will be picking up everything by her. So this is one I really want to get to because I haven't been on my like horror thriller game this year so far, and I think it's just because I've been really wanting cozy stuff. So I'm hoping fall time I can read some more of my spooky books. So those are all the questions, and I really appreciate you watching and being here. It really means a lot to me, and I've been really enjoying making YouTube videos. I didn't think I would love it quite as much. I like wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't know if I would stick with it, and it's just been something that brings me a lot of joy in my life. So I really appreciate you being here and watching and leaving comments and just supporting me. And we can talk books, and that's always fun. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.